31 days in a hospital bed, 0 visitors. Then they asked for $12,000 for a wedding dress. I sent $1. And that's when the real war began. Because here's the thing you need to understand about a family like mine. They weren't just absent. They constructed an entire narrative to make my absence of visitors look like my choice. You need to hear what she said, because what she did wasn't neglect. It was erasure. And when you understand how she made sure no one showed up, you'll understand why $1 is the most generous thing I could have given. My name is Kala. I'm 28, and this is the story of how my family taught me the exact price of my existence and how I finally made them pay in the only currency they understood. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember because I never made it to the gym. Collapsed making coffee. 1 minute standing. The next, fluorescent lights, and a stranger asking my name like it was a test I might fail. How do you measure what someone is worth to people who claim to love you unconditionally? They told me later it was severe internal complications, the kind that don't wait, the kind that need surgery within hours. I called my mother from the ambulance, hands shaking, voice cracking. "Mom, I'm scared. They're taking me into surgery." Her response? "Oh no, that's terrible, sweetheart, keep me updated." Then she hung up. Keep me updated. Like I was reporting traffic, like I wasn't her daughter on a stretcher. I called my father next. He answered on the 3rd ring. I told him what was happening. He said, "Geez, okay, well, let us know how it goes." I heard him ask someone in the room if they wanted anything from the kitchen, before he even hung up properly. I didn't bother calling my sister. Tans and I hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, not since she borrowed $400 and never mentioned paying it back. I texted her. 3 words. Going into surgery. She left me on read for 6 hours. The surgery itself is mostly a blur. Cold rooms. Masked faces. What I remember clearly is waking up afterward, disoriented, throat raw from the breathing tube, and looking toward the door of my hospital room, expecting, hoping, to see someone there. The chair next to my bed was empty. It stayed empty for 31 days. I want to be fair here, because fairness matters even when people don't deserve it back. My mother did text sporadically. "How are you feeling?" on day 3, "Hope you're getting better" on day 9, with a little smiley face emoji, like I had a cold, not 3 surgeries in a body that kept trying to reject its own recovery. My father sent exactly 2 texts the entire time I was hospitalized. The second one was to ask if I still had his lawnmower. My sister sent nothing, not 1 word, until day 19. When she texted to ask if I'd seen her missing AirPods case. I lay in that bed and watched other patients have visitors. An elderly man 2 doors down had his grandchildren bring drawings every single day, taping them to the wall until it looked like an art gallery. The woman across the hall had a revolving door of friends bringing soup, magazines, just sitting with her so she wouldn't be alone. How does a person survive being invisible to the people who raised them? I had a nurse named Priya who started sneaking me extra pudding cups because she said, "Honey, somebody's got to spoil you a little." A nurse. A stranger who'd known me for 4 days was more invested in my survival than the 3 people who'd known me my whole life. I cried more in that hospital from loneliness than I did from the actual pain of recovery. And here's the thing about pain like that. It doesn't just hurt in the moment. It rewires something in you. It teaches you, cell by cell, exactly where you rank in a family's priorities. And once you learn that lesson, you can't unlearn it. You can only decide what you're going to do with it. I was discharged on a Thursday. No one picked me up. I called a rideshare with shaking hands because my body still hadn't fully recovered its strength, and I went home to an apartment that hadn't been checked on in over a month. The plants were dead. The mail was piled up like a paper monument to how invisible I'd become. I sat on my living room floor that first night, too exhausted to even make it to the bedroom, and I made myself a promise. I promised myself I would never again mistake obligation for love. I would never again confuse where family with we care. I didn't have to wait long to test that promise. Exactly 31 days after I came home, I counted, because by then I was counting everything. Like a woman keeping evidence for a trial only she knew was coming, my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Not "how are you feeling?" Not "I'm sorry we weren't there." Just this: "Hi, sweetie, so exciting news. Tans and Vance are getting married in October. We found the most gorgeous dress for her, but it's $12,000 and we're a little short. Could you help out? Family helps family." I read it 3 times. I actually laughed out loud, alone in my apartment. The kind of laugh that has no humor in it at all. Just disbelief trying to find an exit. $12,000 for a dress. For my sister, who hadn't said one word to me while I was fighting for my life, but apparently had plenty of words for missing AirPods. I want to pause here and tell you something about Tansy, because context matters. Tansy is 2 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, she's been the favorite child in ways so obvious it would almost be funny if it hadn't shaped my entire childhood. When we were kids, Tansy got new clothes every season. I got her hand-me-downs, even though we weren't even close in size. When Tansy struggled in school, my parents hired tutors. When I struggled, I was told to try harder. When Tansy got her first car at 17, it was new. When I got my first car at 19, it was a rusted hand-me-down from a family friend that I had to fix myself, with money from my part-time job. I used to think it was my imagination. Kids do that. They assume the worst version of a story can't possibly be true about their own parents, but 31 days in a hospital bed with an empty visitor's chair, that has a way of removing every last bit of doubt you were clinging to. My mother's text just sat there on my screen, this perfect, glowing artifact of everything wrong with my family. They hadn't called to ask how my recovery was going. They hadn't called to apologize for a single day of that month. They called, well, texted, because they needed something. Because that's what I had always been to them. Not a daughter. A resource. I thought about ignoring it completely. I thought about a long, scorched earth response, detailing every single day I spent alone, every missed visit, every shallow text. I drafted that message 3 different times, deleted it 3 different times, because I realized something important. They didn't deserve my explanation. They didn't even deserve my anger. Not really. Not the kind that takes time and energy to construct. What do you give people who have already demonstrated exactly how much you're worth to them? They deserved exactly the level of effort they had given me. So I opened my banking app. I sent $1 to my mother's account, and in the memo line, I wrote 2 words: "Good luck." Then I put my phone on silent and went to bed, for the first peaceful night's sleep I'd had in over a month. Because as it turns out, my imagination wasn't far off. My phone exploded. 11 missed calls from my mother. 6 texts from my father, a man who had texted me exactly twice during my entire hospitalization, suddenly finding the motivation to type in full paragraphs. And then, finally, a message from Tansy herself. The first words she'd sent me in over a month that weren't about AirPods. "Are you serious right now? $1? Do you know how humiliating this is? Mom showed everyone at brunch, and now Aunt Raina thinks you hate me. This is supposed to be the happiest time of my life, and you're making it about you. Making it about me. I sat with that phrase for a long time, as if surviving major surgery alone, as if grieving the absence of every person who was supposed to love me. I didn't respond to any of them that day. I let the messages pile up, the way my mail had piled up while I was in the hospital. Untouched, accumulating, becoming its own kind of evidence. It was my father who finally called me on a voice line 2 days later. I almost didn't answer. Something in me, some small, hopeful, foolish part that apparently hadn't fully learned its lesson yet, made me pick up. "Calla," he said, his voice doing that particular tight thing it does when he's annoyed, but trying to sound reasonable. "What was that about? Your mother is devastated." "Devastated?" I repeated. "That's an interesting word choice. She just wants to help your sister have a beautiful wedding. Is that so terrible?" "Dad," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. "I had surgery a little over a month ago. Did you know that I almost didn't make it through the second procedure? Did you know that?" Silence on the other end. "No," he admitted. "I didn't realize it was that serious." "You didn't realize because you never asked. None of you did. I was alone in that hospital for 31 days. I watched other patients have people who love them show up every single day. I had a nurse bring me pudding because she felt bad that nobody else came. And now, a month after I came home to a dead apartment and dead plants and a recovery I had to manage completely by myself, the first thing any of you reach out about is money. $12,000 for a dress. That's not fair, Calla. We were busy. Busy, I said, for 31 days. All three of you. Busy? He didn't have an answer for that, because there isn't one. There's no version of busy that explains a family failing to show up for someone fighting for their life. Not when they manage to find time for brunches and dress shopping and lawnmower retrieval in that exact same window. You want $12,000 from someone you couldn't be bothered to text more than twice in a month? I gave you my answer. I hung up before he could respond. It felt less like anger and more like setting down something I'd been carrying for way too long. But the story doesn't end there, because 2 weeks later, I found out something that changed everything I thought I understood about that month. I was at my cousin Della's house for a small get-together. Della, one of the only family members who'd actually visited me in the hospital, twice with homemade soup and a stack of paperback novels, because she remembered I liked them. She mentioned something almost in passing. "I'm so glad you're okay," she said. "We were all so worried when your mom told everyone you didn't want visitors." Della's face shifted as she realized she'd said something I clearly hadn't known. "Your mom told the whole family you specifically asked for privacy, that you didn't want anyone seeing you while you were recovering, that it stressed you out to have visitors. She made it sound like you'd basically banned everyone." I sat there in Della's kitchen, feeling something cold spread through my chest that had nothing to do with my recovery, because I had never said that. I had never told a single soul I didn't want visitors. In fact, I remembered specifically telling my mother multiple times in those early days how badly I wanted someone there with me. My mother hadn't just failed to show up. She had constructed an entire narrative to excuse her absence, and worse, to make my absence of visitors look like my own choice, my own coldness, rather than her abandonment. She had taken my pain and repackaged it as my preference, probably so none of the extended family would ask uncomfortable questions about where she'd been. I felt sick. And then, underneath the sickness, something sharper. Something clearer. What do you do when you discover someone has been rewriting your story to hide their own cruelty? I asked Dila if she'd be willing to show me what else had been said in the family group chat during that month, the one I'd been removed from years ago after a disagreement about a holiday dinner. She hesitated, but eventually showed me. What I read explained everything. There were messages from my mother throughout my hospitalization, casually updating the family that I was doing fine, resting up, said she wants space. There was an exchange between her and my aunt about Tansy's wedding planning, dated during my second week in the hospital. The week I'd had complications, a fever that scared even the doctors. My mother wrote that she was swamped with wedding stuff and couldn't help with something Tansy needed. Swamped with wedding stuff. While I lay in a hospital bed alone with a fever, my mother's swamped energy was going toward dress fittings, not toward me. There was no mention of my surgery being serious, no mention of fear or worry or urgency. Just a quiet, convenient erasure so that nobody in the extended family would think to show up and complicate the story she was telling. I sat in my car outside Dila's house for almost 20 minutes after I left, just breathing, recalibrating everything I thought I understood about that month. I had thought my family's absence was simple negligence, busyness, selfishness, the ordinary failures of imperfect people. But this was different. This was a choice, dressed up and disguised, specifically engineered so that I would carry the abandonment alone and silently, without even the dignity of other people knowing what had actually happened. And that's when I understood something I hadn't before. Some families don't just fail you. They write the history of your failure so convincingly that even you start to believe it. They make your pain look like a preference, your loneliness look like a choice, your absence look like arrogance instead of grief. That's when I decided the dollar wasn't enough, not because I wanted revenge for revenge's sake, but because I refused to keep being the only person who knew the truth. I asked Dila to add me back to the family group chat, just temporarily, just so I could say one thing. And when she did, I posted a single message, time-stamped and undeniable, a screenshot of my hospital discharge paperwork showing the dates of my admission and surgery, alongside a simple line. For anyone who was told I didn't want visitors, that wasn't true. I asked for help and support every single day I was in there. I just didn't get it. I think everyone deserves to know that before the wedding planning continues. I left the group chat immediately after sending it, before anyone could respond, because I didn't need their reaction. I just needed the truth to exist somewhere outside of my own head. The fallout from what Della told me later was significant. Aunt Raina, the same aunt who'd apparently been told I hated Tansy over the dollar incident, called my mother directly to ask what was going on. Other relatives who'd quietly wondered why no one mentioned visiting me suddenly had their answer. And it wasn't flattering to anyone but me. My mother tried, predictably, to spin it, claiming I was misremembering, that I'd been on medication and confused about what I'd said. But paperwork doesn't misremember. Dates don't get confused on medication. The truth had teeth now, and it didn't need my mother's permission to bite. As for the wedding dress, I heard through Della because I'd made it clear I wasn't interested in direct contact with my parents or Tansy anymore, that they ended up scaling back significantly. No $12,000 dress, a much smaller budget, a much smaller circle of guests, Because apparently several relatives who'd been excited to contribute suddenly developed a newfound reluctance once they understood the full picture of what had actually happened during my hospitalization. I didn't do any of that to sabotage Tansy's wedding. I want to be honest about that. I did it because I refuse to be a person who absorbs cruelty quietly just to maintain someone else's comfortable narrative. If the truth made things harder for them, that wasn't my doing. That was simply the natural cost of the lie finally meeting daylight. It's been several months now. I haven't spoken to my mother, my father, or Tansy since that message in the group chat. No grand reconciliation. No tearful apology that suddenly makes all of it make sense. Just silence. The same silence they gave me for 31 days. Except now, it's a silence I chose, and there's a strange peace in that. What I have instead is Della, who shows up. I have a small circle of people now who understand that showing up isn't optional, isn't something you do only when there's a wedding to plan or a favor to extract. I think about that empty chair next to my hospital bed sometimes. 31 days of it sitting there untouched. A quiet monument to exactly where I ranked, but I don't think about it with the same grief anymore. I think about it as the moment I finally understood the difference between people who are family by blood and people who are family by action. So here's what I want to ask you, because I think about this more than I probably should. If the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally only show up when they need something from you, was $1 and 2 words too harsh? Or was it exactly the answer they deserved? Because here's the uncomfortable question no one wants to ask. If your family treats you like an ATM, are you obligated to keep withdrawing? I know what I decided, and I'd do it again. Not because I'm cruel, but because I finally learned the difference between giving someone love and giving someone access to you when they've already shown they don't deserve it. This has been Kala's story, and here's what I want you to take from it. If you've ever had to learn the hard way who actually shows up for you, you already know exactly where this story lives. And if you're watching this and realizing you have people in your life who only reach out when they need something, maybe the most powerful thing you can give them isn't an argument, isn't an explanation. It's $1 and 2 words. Because sometimes the smallest amount says everything. If this story hit you, if you've ever had to decide how much your absence was worth to people who made your pain look like a preference, drop a $sign in the comments. Because the only thing louder than a family that chooses to abandon you is the one person who refuses to pretend it didn't happen. This has been When Family Revenge Strikes. New stories every single day.